Hello, my dear English learners. Welcome back to Native Flow English. I'm Sarah.
If you are new here, I want you to know that this channel is all about helping you improve your English every single day. We upload new listening practice episodes daily so you can train your ears, expand your vocabulary, and build your confidence in understanding spoken English. In each episode, I share real-life stories, everyday situations, and engaging examples to make your English learning natural and enjoyable. Today, I want to take you through different everyday topics, all woven into a variety of stories so you can get the most out of this listening session. Let's start with something very familiar: morning routines. I will share with you the story of Daniel, a software engineer who lives in a busy city. Daniel wakes up at 6:30 every morning, opens the window to let in fresh air, and spends the first 10 minutes stretching. Then, he prepares a simple breakfast, usually 2 slices of toast, boiled eggs, and a cup of tea. He believes that having a slow and calm morning helps him handle the stress of his job. This reminds me of my own routine. I also like starting my day with quiet time, sipping tea, and going over my plan for the day before jumping into work. Another story I want to share is about Sarah, a teacher who lives in a small town. Sarah has a husband named John and 2 children. Her mornings are full of energy and movement. She wakes up early, cooks breakfast for the family, and makes sure the children are ready for school. One interesting thing about Sarah is that she prepares their school lunchboxes the night before, so she never has to rush in the morning. This habit saves her time and keeps her mornings stress-free. Listening to stories like Sarah's can inspire us to organize our own schedules better. Now, let's talk about one of the most common everyday activities: grocery shopping. Imagine Michael, a retired firefighter, who goes to the market every Saturday morning. He carries a small notebook where he writes down what he needs. On his list, you might see items like fresh bread, apples, carrots, and milk. Michael says, this habit prevents him from buying things he doesn't need. I can relate to that because whenever I shop without a list, I often end up with extra snacks I did not plan to buy. Having a list is a simple way to save money and stay focused. Here's another everyday situation: meeting a neighbor. Emily, who lives in an apartment building, often meets her neighbor, Mr. Carter, in the hallway. Mr. Carter is an elderly man who loves gardening. Emily always greets him with a smile and asks about his plants. This simple act of greeting and showing interest builds a friendly relationship between them. Many people underestimate the power of small conversations, but they can make a community feel warmer and more connected. Let's move on to a slightly different story: helping someone in need. One rainy afternoon, David, a shop owner, saw a man standing outside his store looking worried. The man explained that his car had broken down and he needed to call for help, but his phone battery was dead. David invited him inside and let him use the store's phone. Later, the man came back with a thank you card to express his gratitude. Stories like this remind us that kindness can leave a deep impression and create trust between people. Another topic we all deal with is cooking at home. Laura, a nurse, works long shifts at the hospital. On her days off, she enjoys cooking for her husband and children. One weekend, she decided to try making homemade bread for the first time. She carefully followed the recipe, mixed the dough, and let it rise. The smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen, and when they sat down to eat, her husband told her it was the best bread he had ever tasted. Laura said it was not just about the bread, but about the joy of making something for the people she loves. Now I want to share a situation about time management. Peter, a university student, was struggling to finish his assignments on time. One day, he decided to make a timetable. He divided his day into blocks: study, meals, exercise, and rest. Within a week, he noticed that he was finishing his work earlier and even had time for reading in the evenings. Peter learned that when you control your time, you control your stress. Finally, here is a story about learning from mistakes. Rachel, who runs a small bakery, once baked 50 loaves of bread for a large order, but she accidentally used twice the amount of salt. The bread was too salty to sell. Instead of throwing it away, she gave it to a local animal shelter for their animals to eat safely. Although she lost some profit, she turned a mistake into an opportunity to help others. I have many more stories to share with you today, each one covering a different part of daily life, so you can practice listening and pick up natural English. Expressions. We will talk about home maintenance, visiting the doctor, attending community events, and even planning family gatherings. Every story will help you understand how English is used in real situations. Now, let's talk about visiting the doctor. Catherine, a librarian, had been feeling tired for several weeks. She finally made an appointment with her family doctor, Dr. Harris. At the clinic, she explained her symptoms clearly, mentioning when they started and how often they happened. Dr. Harris ordered a few tests and discovered she was low in iron. He advised her to include more leafy vegetables and beans in her diet. Within a month, she felt much better. Catherine's experience is a good reminder that noticing changes in your health and acting early can prevent bigger problems later. Another story comes from James, a bus driver who loves keeping his home organized. One weekend, he decided to clean his garage, which had been cluttered for years. He sorted everything into 3 piles: things to keep, things to donate, and things to throw away. By the end of the day, he had a clean, spacious garage and a car that could finally fit inside. The next morning, he donated the unused tools and furniture to a local charity. James said that decluttering not only improved his home, but also made his mind feel clearer. Let's move on to gardening. Helen, a retired nurse, spends a lot of time in her backyard. She grows tomatoes, cucumbers, and herbs. One summer, she decided to try something new, planting sunflowers along the fence. Every morning, she watered them and made sure they got enough sunlight. Within 2 months, the flowers had grown taller than her. Neighbors would stop by just to admire them. Helen found that gardening was not only good exercise, but also a way to bring beauty and joy to the neighborhood. Now, here is a situation about attending a community event. Patrick, a father of 3, was invited to a local food fair. He took his children along, and together they tried different types of homemade bread, fresh fruit, and local honey. They also joined a cooking demonstration where a local chef showed how to make vegetable soup. Patrick said the event was a great opportunity to support small businesses and spend quality time with his children. Another everyday story comes from Anna, a shop assistant. One rainy day, while she was waiting at the bus stop, she saw a woman struggling with several heavy bags. Anna offered to help carry them to the woman's house, which was just a few streets away. The woman thanked her warmly and invited her in for tea. Although Anna politely declined, she felt happy that she could make someone's day a little easier. Let's talk about meal planning. George, a school teacher, realized that he was spending too much money on eating out. He decided to plan his meals for the entire week. On Sundays, he would write down what to cook for each day, buy all the ingredients, and store them neatly in his fridge. This change saved him money, reduced food waste, and made his evenings less stressful because he already knew what to cook. Here's another topic: public transport. Lisa, a secretary, commutes to work by train. One morning, the train was delayed. due to heavy rain. Instead of getting frustrated, she used the time to read an article she had saved on her phone. By the time the train arrived, she had learned something new about gardening techniques, which she later shared with her friend. Lisa's story shows how waiting time can be turned into learning time if we choose wisely. Let's also cover the topic of family gatherings. Edward, a baker, hosted a family lunch at his home. He prepared roasted chicken, baked potatoes, and a fresh salad. His wife, Grace, baked an apple pie for dessert. They invited Edward's parents, his sister, and her children. Everyone sat around the table, shared stories, and laughed together. Edward said moments like these remind him of the importance of staying connected to family, no matter how busy life gets. Another important daily situation is handling unexpected guests. Rebecca, a tailor, was working in her sewing room when her cousin, Samuel, arrived without notice. She welcomed him warmly and quickly made tea. They sat in the living room, and Samuel shared news about his new job. Rebecca was glad she kept her home tidy, as it made it easy to host visitors without feeling stressed. Next, let's talk about preparing for a trip. William, a civil engineer, planned a weekend visit to the countryside with his wife and children. He booked a small cottage, packed clothes, snacks, and a first aid kit. On the way, they stopped at a farm to buy fresh milk and eggs. The children enjoyed feeding the chickens, and the family took many photos together. William said the best part of the trip was the quiet evenings, sitting outside and watching the stars. Another story is about helping a neighbor. Margaret, a dentist, lives next to an elderly couple. One winter morning, she noticed that their driveway was covered with snow. Before going to work, she took her shovel and cleared the path for them. Later that day, the couple brought her a basket of oranges to thank her. Small gestures like these build trust and friendship among neighbors. Let's also talk about household budgeting. Robert, a bank clerk, wanted to save money for a family holiday. He started tracking his expenses in a notebook, writing down every purchase. After a month, he noticed he was spending too much on unnecessary snacks. By cutting back, he saved enough in 6 months to take his family to the seaside. Robert's story shows how small changes in spending can lead to big rewards. Another everyday scenario is dealing with bad weather. Olivia, a university lecturer, had planned a picnic with her students. On the day of the picnic, it started raining heavily. Instead of canceling, she invited everyone to her house. They prepared sandwiches, made hot tea, and played board games. The group agreed that the indoor gathering was just as fun as the outdoor picnic would have been. Here's a story about buying gifts. Charles, a driver, wanted to surprise his wife on their wedding anniversary. Instead of buying something expensive, he made a wooden jewelry box by hand. He spent several evenings sanding, polishing, and decorating it. When he gave it to her, she was touched by the effort and love he put into making it. Now let's talk about learning new skills. Sophie, a stay-at-home mother, decided to learn basic car maintenance. She asked her brother to show her how to check the oil, change a tire, and replace the air filter. A few weeks later, when her car had a flat tire, she was able to fix it herself without calling for help. This gave her more confidence in handling unexpected situations. If you want, I can continue with even more daily life stories, like managing time with children, handling busy workdays, visiting public offices, and making important decisions at home. These will keep the listening practice flowing and give you plenty of real-life English examples. All right, let's keep going. I will continue sharing more fresh and unique everyday life stories so you can practice listening to natural English while picturing real situations. Each story will be different from anything I have told you so far. Let's begin with a story about dealing with postal services. Henry, a carpenter, needed to send an important set of documents to a customer in another city. Early in the morning, he went to the post office, stood in line, and when it was his turn, he made sure to fill out the address correctly. The clerk offered him the option of express delivery, and Henry chose it because the documents had to arrive quickly. 3 days later, the customer called to confirm the safe arrival. Henry felt satisfied knowing his careful preparation paid off. Now let's talk about paying bills. Samantha, an office manager, prefers to pay her electricity and water bills in person rather than online. One afternoon, she took her folder with all the paper bills and went to the payment center. While waiting in line, she noticed that some people were confused about where to stand. Samantha politely helped them find the right counter. This simple act made the process smoother for everyone, and the cashier thanked her for being considerate. Here's a different story. Planning a tea. Family picnic. Martin, a bus conductor, decided to take his wife and children to a local park on a sunny Sunday. He packed sandwiches, fruit, juice, and a blanket. At the park, they found a quiet spot under a large tree. The children played catch, and Martin read them a short story. They stayed until the evening, enjoying the fresh air and the peaceful atmosphere. Another everyday event is taking a child to the dentist. Claire, a mother of 2, noticed her son had a small cavity. She booked an appointment and explained to him what would happen so he would not be afraid. At the clinic, the dentist greeted the boy warmly and fixed the tooth quickly. On the way home, Claire stopped at a bakery and bought a loaf of bread as a small treat for her son's bravery. Let's talk about a situation with household maintenance. Leonard, a chef, noticed that one of the light bulbs in his kitchen stopped working. Instead of ignoring it, he went to the hardware store, bought a replacement, and changed it the same day. The store assistant also advised him to get an energy-saving bulb, which would reduce his electricity bill in the long run. Leonard realized that small repairs, done on time, make a home safer and more comfortable. Now here's a story about going to the market. Teresa, a seamstress, enjoys buying fresh vegetables every Saturday morning. She prefers to go early because the produce is fresher and the market is less crowded. One morning, she saw a vendor selling strawberries at a discount because they were very ripe. She bought them and later made a delicious strawberry jam for her family. Let's move to public safety. Andrew, a shopkeeper, was walking home when he noticed a bicycle lying in the middle of the road. He picked it up and placed it on the sidewalk to prevent an accident. A few minutes later, a boy came running and thanked him. It was his bicycle, and it had fallen when he stopped to tie his shoes. Andrew's quick action might have prevented a dangerous situation. Here's another useful scenario: preparing for guests staying overnight. Denise, an accountant, invited her cousin's family to stay at her house for 2 nights. She prepared the guest room with fresh sheets, extra towels, and a small basket of snacks. She also placed a kettle and tea bags in the room so they could make tea whenever they wanted. Her guests were touched by the effort and said they felt at home. Next, let's talk about visiting a government office. Peter, a delivery driver, needed to renew his driver's license. He gathered all the required documents, took a day off from work, and arrived at the office early to avoid long lines. The officer checked his papers, took his photo, and processed the renewal. Peter left with his new license in hand, happy that the process went smoothly because he came prepared. Another daily topic is getting a haircut. Laura, a nurse, realized her hair had grown too long and was hard to manage. She booked an appointment at her regular salon, greeted the hairdresser, and explained exactly how much she wanted trimmed. After the haircut, she felt lighter and more refreshed. ready to return to her busy schedule at the hospital. Let's share a story about lending a helping hand at work. Benjamin, who works at a warehouse, saw a colleague struggling to lift a heavy box. He quickly walked over and helped carry it to the shelf. Later, the colleague returned the favor when Benjamin needed help moving large items. Their teamwork made the job easier for both of them. Here's a situation involving children and school activities. Rachel, a primary school teacher, organized a small exhibition of her students' art. She decorated the classroom, displayed the paintings, and invited parents to come and see the work. The children were proud to show their creations, and the parents appreciated the chance to see their children's progress. Now let's talk about preparing for rainy days. Gregory, a librarian, always keeps an umbrella in his work bag. One afternoon, when it suddenly started raining heavily, he offered the umbrella to a colleague who had none. Gregory walked home in the rain himself but felt content knowing he helped someone stay dry. Here's another everyday moment: buying bread from a bakery. Susan, a retired teacher, visits the bakery every morning to get a fresh loaf. She knows the baker well, and they often chat for a few minutes. One day, the baker gave her a small bag of cookies as a gift for being a loyal customer for so many years. Let's cover the topic of helping with directions. Mark, a university professor, was walking through the city when a tourist approached him, looking lost. The tourist showed him a map, and Mark clearly explained how to reach the museum. The tourist thanked him and walked away smiling. Another story is about laundry. Elaine, a florist, usually washes clothes on Saturday mornings. One weekend, she decided to wash all the curtains in her house as well. The fresh smell and clean look made her home feel brighter and more inviting. Now, here's a situation with public transport etiquette. Oliver, a young father, boarded a bus with his daughter. He noticed an elderly woman standing, so he offered his seat to her. The woman thanked him warmly, and Oliver's daughter saw the value of respecting others through his example. Let's talk about collecting parcels. Fiona, an interior designer, ordered some materials online. When they arrived at the local delivery center, she took her ID, signed for the parcels, and checked to make sure everything was correct before leaving. This saved her from making a second trip in case of missing items. Another scenario is about attending a school meeting. Jonathan, a mechanic, went to his son's school for a parent-teacher meeting. The teacher gave feedback on his son's progress and shared tips for helping him study better at home. Jonathan appreciated the advice and started setting aside time in the evenings to read with his son. Here's a useful daily story: repairing clothes. Caroline, a housewife, noticed that her husband's shirt had a missing button. She quickly sewed a new one on before he went to work. This small act. Next, let's talk about community volunteering. Frank, a retired postman, volunteers at a local shelter every Wednesday. He helps distribute food and talks to the people there. Volunteering gives him a sense of purpose and connection to others in his community. Another story is about learning how to cook a new recipe. Naomi, a bank teller, wanted to try making vegetable soup. She bought all the ingredients in the morning, followed the recipe carefully, and served it to her family for dinner. They enjoyed it so much that it became part of their regular meal plan. We can also discuss keeping important documents safe. Simon, a real estate agent, keeps all his property papers, insurance documents, and certificates in a fireproof box at home. This gives him peace of mind in case of emergencies. Another situation is planning for a child's birthday. Elizabeth, a baker, decided to organize a small birthday party for her daughter in their backyard. She decorated the garden with balloons and ribbons, prepared sandwiches, fruit juice, and a cake with fresh cream. She also arranged a treasure hunt game for the children. The party was simple, but her daughter was thrilled to have her friends over, and the guests enjoyed the games and the food. Now let's talk about visiting a relative in the hospital. Christopher, a taxi driver, heard that his uncle had undergone surgery. He bought a basket of fresh oranges and a card with a warm message. At the hospital, he spent time chatting with his uncle, encouraging him to recover soon. His uncle later said that the visit had lifted his spirits and made his recovery easier. Here's a story about going to the bank. Angela, a shop owner, needed to deposit the week's earnings into her account. She counted the money carefully at home, filled out the deposit slip, and went to the bank early in the morning. The teller processed the deposit quickly, and Angela left knowing her business finances were secure. Next, let's talk about walking in the park. Philip, a retired engineer, takes a walk in the park every evening after dinner. He enjoys watching the ducks in the pond, greeting other walkers, and listening to the sound of leaves in the wind. One evening, he met a young boy flying a kite and helped him untangle the string when it got caught in a tree branch. That small act of kindness turned into a friendly chat, and they started greeting each other whenever they met again in the park. Another everyday event is doing seasonal cleaning. Margaret, a school principal, spends one weekend each spring cleaning her entire house from top to bottom. She washes curtains, wipes down cupboards, and donates clothes she no longer wears. At the end of the day, she opens the windows to let fresh air in and enjoys the feeling of a fresh, organized home. Let's move to the topic of taking care of pets. Douglas, a gardener, has a dog named Max. Every Sunday, he brushes Max's fur, checks his paws for any cuts, and takes him for a long walk in the nearby fields. Max always wags his tail in excitement, and Douglas says it's one of his favorite parts of the week. Another story is about preparing for a long drive. Hannah, a school counselor, planned to drive to another city to attend a workshop. The day before the trip, she checked the car's tire pressure, oil level, and fuel. She also packed water, snacks, and a small first aid kit. The journey went smoothly, and she arrived on time without any problems. Let's talk about collecting firewood. Samuel, who lives in a rural area, spends part of his autumn days gathering and stacking firewood for the coming winter. He keeps it in a dry shed to make sure it's ready when needed. He says that the smell of burning wood in the fireplace is one of the things that makes winter feel cozy. Here's a situation about buying school supplies. Rebecca, a mother of two, took her children to the stationery shop at the start of the school year. They bought notebooks, pencils, rulers, and backpacks. She also labeled each item with her children's names to avoid mix-ups at school. Another common experience is visiting a friend's house for tea. Edward, a bookshop owner, was invited to his friend Charles's home. Charles had prepared tea, biscuits, and a plate of fresh fruit. They sat in the living room, talked about their families, and shared stories from their childhood. Edward enjoyed the warm and welcoming atmosphere. Let's also talk about replacing household items. Olivia, a hairdresser, noticed her old kettle was starting to rust. She went to a home goods store, compared different models, and chose one with an automatic shut-off feature for safety. That same evening, she made tea in the new kettle and appreciated how quickly it boiled water. Here's a story about waiting for a repair service. Frank, a delivery driver, discovered that his washing machine had stopped working. He called the repair center, booked an appointment, and stayed at home until the technician arrived. The problem turned out to be a small part that needed replacing, and the repair was done within an hour. Frank was glad he acted quickly before the problem became worse. Another scenario is planting fruit trees. Emma, a retired teacher, decided to plant 2 apple trees in her garden. She prepared the soil, watered them regularly, and watched them grow over the months. By the next autumn, the trees produced their first small harvest of sweet apples. Let's talk about arranging furniture. Daniel, a marketing consultant, wanted to make his living room more spacious. One weekend, he moved the sofa closer to the wall, placed the coffee table in the center, and added a small reading chair near the window. The new arrangement made the room feel brighter and more open. Here's a daily moment involving the weather forecast. Julia, a school bus driver, checks the weather every morning before work. If she sees rain is expected, she keeps an umbrella and a raincoat ready. One day, she noticed a storm warning and advised the children to bring extra jackets. This small precaution kept them comfortable on their way home. Another useful topic is preparing for a family reunion. Howard, a farmer, invited his brothers and sisters to spend the weekend at his home. He cooked large meals, prepared extra bedding, and arranged outdoor activities like a small barbecue and a walk in the fields. The reunion was filled with laughter, shared memories, and promises to meet again soon. Let's cover the topic of visiting the library. Natalie, a university student, needed books for her research project. She visited the local library, found the titles she needed, and borrowed them for 2 weeks. The librarian also suggested some additional resources that Natalie had not considered. Another everyday story is fixing a fence. Paul, a security guard, noticed that one of the wooden panels in his backyard fence had come loose. He bought nails and a hammer, secured the panel, and checked the rest of the fence to make sure it was stable. Here's one about attending a community workshop. Claire, a florist, signed up for a free workshop on waste reduction at the community center. She learned practical tips such as reusing jars and composting vegetable scraps. She later applied these tips in her home and saved money while reducing waste. Let's talk about buying fresh bread from a street vendor. Michael, a teacher, passes a bread cart every morning on his way to work. One day he stopped to buy a loaf, and the vendor told him it had just come out of the oven. Michael enjoyed the warm bread for breakfast with his family. Another scenario is taking part in a neighborhood cleanup. Sophia, a nurse, joined her neighbors to collect litter from the park and plant flowers along the pathway. The area looked much better afterward, and everyone felt proud of their efforts. We can also talk about storing food properly. Richard, a restaurant manager, makes sure to store fruits and vegetables in the right conditions to keep them fresh. At home, he uses airtight containers and checks the fridge regularly to avoid waste. Another daily story is replacing batteries in household devices. Linda, a secretary, noticed that her wall clock had stopped working. She replaced the old batteries with new ones and set the time again. She also checked her remote controls and flashlights to make sure they had working batteries. Next is helping at a charity sale. George, a college lecturer, volunteered at a local charity market, arranging donated items and helping customers. The event raised enough money to buy supplies for the local school. When I think about how learning English fits into daily life, I often remember one particular story from my time living in a small coastal town. The town was quiet, surrounded by blue waters and long stretches of sandy beaches. There weren't many English speakers there, so every time someone came to visit from abroad, it felt like the entire town lit up with curiosity. One summer, a young couple from Canada stayed in the guest house where I worked part-time. They spoke very little of the local language, so every day they relied on me to help them navigate, ordering meals, asking for directions, even bargaining with shopkeepers. It was an interesting challenge for me because, although I was already fluent in English, I had never acted as someone's main language bridge before. On one occasion, they wanted to buy fresh seafood from the local market. This market was busy, noisy, and full of colorful displays. From bright red chili, peppers to freshly caught fish laid out on crushed ice. Sellers shouted prices. Children ran between the stalls, and the smell of the ocean mixed with the scent of grilled snacks from the food stands. The Canadian couple didn't know where to start. The wife pointed at a basket of shrimp, but didn't know how to ask the price. I stepped in, speaking to the seller in the local language and then translating into English. But what made it memorable was how we laughed together when the seller insisted we try his special offer, a type of sea snail they had never seen before. They were hesitant at first, but I explained in English how locals usually cook. Adding garlic, chili, and lime. They agreed to try it, and later that evening they invited me to share the meal with them. We sat on the balcony of their guest house, looking out over the ocean as the sun went down. The waves were calm, the air was warm, and the scent of the cooked seafood filled the space. Over dinner, they told me how relieved they felt having someone guide them through daily situations, especially in a language they didn't understand. That evening taught me something valuable. Language is not just about words. It's about creating comfort, trust, and connection. You can make someone's day much easier just by helping them express their needs clearly. This is the kind of mindset I encourage you to have when practicing English. Think about the ways you can use it to make life smoother, whether for yourself or for others. Imagine being in a situation where a tourist asks for help, or a new neighbor struggles to read an official notice. If you can step in with your English skills, you instantly become useful. Now, let me share another moment from my life that will help you practice both listening and visualization. A few years ago, I traveled to a big city for a conference. It was one of those trips where everything seemed to go wrong at first. My bus arrived late, it was raining heavily, and my suitcase wheel broke while I was walking from the station to the hotel. I remember standing under a small shop's awning trying to balance my bag while looking up directions on my phone. Then something unexpected happened. A man walked up to me and in very clear English asked, "Do you need help?" He was not a local either, but he had been living in the city for a few years and knew his way around. I explained my situation, and he not only showed me the quickest route to my hotel, but also carried my bag most of the way. As we walked, we talked about our work, our favorite foods, and even the challenges of adapting to new environments. That conversation lasted less than 30 minutes, but it left a strong impression on me. It reminded me that being ready to talk to strangers in English can lead to unexpected kindness and connection. Sometimes we overthink speaking, worrying about perfect grammar or finding the exact word. But in real life, what matters is your willingness to start a conversation. Even imperfect sentences can carry a perfect message. I want you to picture a similar scenario. Imagine you are in a busy airport. Announcements echo over the loudspeakers, people rush past with rolling suitcases, and you're trying to find your boarding gate. You see a traveler standing near a map, clearly confused. You walk up and say, "Hi, do you need help?" Maybe they're looking for gate 32, and you happen to be going in the same direction. You walk together, chatting about where you're from and where you're headed. That's a real-life speaking opportunity. Short, spontaneous, and natural. Speaking of natural situations, let's move into a story that combines both daily life and a bit of humor. Once, while visiting my cousin in the countryside, I decided to help her make breakfast. She was out feeding the chickens, so I started making pancakes. I was following the recipe carefully until I realized I had accidentally added salt instead of sugar. When we sat down to eat, her husband took the first bite, and the look on his face was unforgettable. He politely smiled, but his eyes told the truth. I immediately apologized, and we all laughed about it. My cousin said, "Well, now you've invented a new recipe. Salty pancakes." This little mistake might seem unrelated to English practice, but actually, it connects perfectly. In conversations, you will make salty pancake mistakes, using the wrong word, mixing tenses, or misunderstanding something. The important thing is to react with humor and move on. If you can laugh about it, you'll remember the moment and learn from it without feeling embarrassed. Another memory that ties into this is from a time when I joined a cooking class abroad. The chef was explaining a recipe in English, but his accent was quite strong, and he spoke quickly. I had to focus intensely, watching his gestures and matching them to the words I understood. At one point, I thought he said, "Add 1 big spoon of vinegar," but he had actually said, "Add 1 big spoon of vanilla." You can imagine the confusion. Luckily, a classmate noticed and corrected me before I made the mistake. That day, I learned that listening is not just about hearing words. It's about connecting them with the context, the situation, and the body language. In fact, here's something you can try as a practice exercise. Choose a familiar daily activity, maybe making tea, watering plants, or tidying your desk. Now imagine explaining that activity to someone in English, step by step, as if they've never done it before. Use simple sentences, but keep your tone friendly and natural. You might say, "First fill the kettle with water, then turn it on and wait for it to boil. While you wait, prepare your cup and tea bag." This type of practice builds confidence and helps you organize your thoughts clearly. Finally, let me leave you with one more story for this section. When I was a teenager, my school hosted an exchange program. Students from different countries came to stay for a week, and my family hosted a girl from Japan. She was shy and spoke very softly in English, but every evening after dinner we would sit on the porch and share stories about our day. One night, she told me about her dream to travel across Europe by train. I was fascinated, and we ended up spending 2 hours talking about all the countries she wanted to visit, the foods she wanted to try, and the languages she wanted to learn. By the end of the week, her English had improved noticeably, not because she studied grammar, but because she spoke every single day in a relaxed, friendly setting. That's the power of consistent, real-life practice. It turns language from something you study into something you live. One of the most interesting things I've noticed while helping people improve their English is how quickly confidence grows when you start noticing progress in real-life situations. It is one thing to learn new words and practice them in a quiet room, but it is an entirely different feeling when those same words just slip out naturally during a conversation without you even thinking about them. That's when you realize, wow, I'm actually getting this. I remember a student of mine, a man named Rafael from Brazil. When he first joined my online group classes, he was shy and nervous. He had this habit of writing everything down before speaking, as if he needed a script in his hand just to say a sentence. But after a few months of listening daily to English podcasts, talking with his classmates, and not worrying too much about mistakes, he found himself chatting with a stranger in an airport cafe for almost 20 minutes, without a notebook, without hesitation, just pure conversation. The joy on his face when he told me about that moment was unforgettable. That's why I encourage you to put yourself in situations where English can just happen naturally. Sometimes it's as simple as greeting the delivery person in English, or asking a tourist in your city if they need directions. It might feel awkward at first, but those little real-life exchanges are like hidden gems. They're small, but each one adds up and strengthens your ability. In my own life, I use this same method when learning other languages. I remember when I was trying to learn basic Japanese phrases before a trip to Tokyo. I didn't just study from a book. Instead, I would greet my barista with konnichiwa, or try ordering sushi in Japanese at a restaurant in my city. The servers often smiled and corrected me gently, but that's exactly what I needed. Kind, real-world feedback. One day during that same trip to Tokyo, I walked into a tiny ramen shop where no one spoke English. The menu was entirely in Japanese. No pictures, no translations. It was a challenge, but instead of panicking, I remembered a few phrases and pointed while saying, "Kore o kudasai." This, please. The owner's face lit up, and she even brought me a free small dish because she appreciated the effort. That whole moment stayed in my mind because it reminded me, communication is not always about perfect grammar. It's about connection, effort, and sincerity. And that's something you can carry into your English learning every single day. Now, let me tell you about something that happened with my cousin Sophie, who recently moved to Canada for her master's degree. When she arrived, she thought her English was fine because she'd studied it for years in school. But on her first grocery shopping trip, she realized she didn't know what deli counter and bagged lettuce or self-checkout meant. She had to ask for help multiple times, and although she felt embarrassed in the moment, she decided to treat it as an adventure instead of a failure. She started keeping a little Canadian English notebook in her bag. Every time she learned a new phrase from a cashier, neighbor, or classmate, she wrote it down along with the situation where she heard it. Within 3 months, her notebook was full, and her everyday conversations became smoother because she had built her own personalized dictionary from real-life encounters. This is the beauty of using English in your daily life. You don't just learn words, you collect experiences, and experiences stick. Think about the last time you learned something completely new and connected it to a specific event. Maybe it was a cooking term you learned while making a recipe from YouTube, or a travel phrase you picked up when booking a hotel. That link between the word and the moment makes it almost impossible to forget. I can still remember learning the phrase long shot in English when I was a teenager, because my uncle used it during a family discussion about whether our football team could win the championship. He laughed and said, "It's a long shot, but maybe we can do it." I didn't know what it meant, so I asked, and he explained it. Even now, years later, the image of that conversation and my uncle's hopeful expression comes back every time I hear the phrase. I also think about my friend Omar, who runs a small bakery. When he first opened his shop, most of his customers were tourists, so he had to use English every day even though he wasn't confident at first. Instead of avoiding conversations, he turned every customer interaction into a chance to practice. One day, a tourist from Ireland came in and ordered a sticky bun, which Omar had never heard of. He thought for a moment, then asked the customer to describe it. The tourist explained, and Omar realized it was similar to a pastry he already sold, just with a different name. That day, he not only learned a new word, but also sold 2 extra pastries because the customer posted about his bakery on social media. Omar told me, "Natasha, I realized that speaking English isn't just about language. It's about building relationships." And honestly, That's true for all of us. Whether you're learning English for travel, for work, or simply for personal growth, every conversation you have is an opportunity to connect with another person. Even short exchanges can lead to big changes in your skills and confidence. You don't have to wait for the right moment or a perfect sentence to speak. The right moment is the one that's happening right now. Speaking of seizing the moment, I once had an unforgettable encounter while waiting for a bus in Barcelona. There was a young woman standing next to me looking frustrated as she stared at her phone. I overheard her speaking in English to someone on a call, trying to figure out directions. I stepped in and asked if she needed help. She turned out to be from Australia, traveling solo, and she was relieved to talk to someone who understood her. We ended up taking the same bus and chatting the entire way about travel, food, and culture. That 20-minute ride became a mini language exchange. She taught me some Australian slang, and I shared a few Spanish phrases she could use during her trip. We parted ways at different stops, but even now, I smile thinking about how that small decision to start a conversation turned a quiet bus ride into something memorable. Every day is filled with moments like that, but we often pass them by because we're shy, afraid of mistakes, or worried about how we'll sound. The truth is, most people are not judging you. In fact, many are impressed that you're making the effort to speak in a language that isn't your first. And more often than not, they'll be patient and supportive. That's why I always say, don't measure your progress only by test scores or textbook chapters. Measure it by the number of conversations you've had, the smiles you've shared, and the times you've pushed yourself to speak even when it felt scary. I have so many more little stories like these, about ordering the wrong dish in a restaurant, but ending up loving it, about misunderstanding someone and turning it into a funny moment, about helping a stranger in English and learning something new in return. Each one has taught me that the road to fluency isn't a straight path. It's a winding journey full of surprises, challenges, and connections that shape you not just as a language learner, but as a person. You know, the other day I was sitting in my small but cozy living room sipping a warm cup of coffee when I remembered something from years ago that still makes me smile. It was the time I joined a local 30-day improvement challenge in my town. It wasn't just about English. People were signing up to learn new skills, get fit, cook healthier meals, or even start a creative project. I signed up for English in 30 days just for fun, but honestly, I had no idea it would change so many parts of my life. Every evening, we'd gather in the community hall, a place that smelled faintly of fresh wood polish and coffee, and we would share something new we'd learned that day. The rule was simple: speak only in English during the session. No matter your accent, no matter your mistakes, you had to keep going. And that rule was surprisingly powerful. One evening, during the second week, we were given a challenge. Describe a memorable day from our lives in as much detail as possible. My turn came, and I decided to tell the story of when I got lost in Istanbul. I remember walking through the narrow streets of the old bazaar, mesmerized by the colors of the lamps and the smell of roasted chestnuts. I had no map. My phone battery was dying, and my sense of direction was worse than ever. At first, I panicked, but then I started asking locals for directions, in broken English and with hand gestures. I'll never forget the kindness of a shop owner who not only showed me the way but also gave me a cup of sweet apple tea while we talked. That evening in the hall, as I described the incident, I could see people's eyes light up. Even those who barely knew me were leaning forward, listening to every detail. That was when I realized the more you make your English about real-life experiences, the easier it becomes to remember and use. Fast forward to today, and I still use that method. For example, when I cook, I sometimes narrate to myself in English what I'm doing. If I'm chopping onions, I'll say, "Now I'm cutting the onions into small pieces. The knife is sharp, so I need to be careful." When I stir a soup, I'll say, "I'm mixing the ingredients slowly so the flavors can blend together." It might sound silly, but talking to yourself in English about simple daily actions is like giving your brain constant little workouts. And the best part? You don't need anyone else around to do it. Another memory that stands out is when I decided to learn English through music. I've always loved listening to songs, but one day I thought, why not sing along and focus on the meaning? I remember sitting in my bedroom with my old laptop, headphones on, listening to a soft ballad over and over. I didn't just memorize the lyrics. I stopped to think about what each line meant. I tried to imagine the story behind the song, who the singer was talking to, what they were feeling, why certain words were chosen. Over time, I realized my listening skills were improving naturally, without me even noticing. The same thing happened when I started watching TV shows in English. At first, I kept the subtitles on, but after a few weeks, I challenged myself to watch without them. It wasn't easy. I missed words. I misunderstood jokes. But slowly, my brain began to adapt. One night, while watching a comedy show, I caught myself laughing at a joke before the character even finished speaking. That's when I thought, wow, I'm actually understanding this in real time now. That was such a confidence boost. Speaking of confidence, let me tell you about the time I had to make a phone call to book a hotel in another country. The call was entirely in English and I was nervous. I practiced in my head before dialing. "Hello, I'd like to book a double room for 2 nights, please." But of course, the person on the other end didn't stick to my script. They asked questions I hadn't prepared for, like, "Would you like breakfast included?" And, "Do you have any special requests?" At first, I froze for a second. Then, I remembered what I'd learned. Stay calm, listen carefully, and if you're not sure, ask them to repeat or explain. By the end of the call, not only had I booked the room successfully, but I also felt like I'd just climbed a personal mountain. I think one of the biggest mistakes learners make is waiting for the perfect moment to use English. They want to be completely ready before speaking, but the truth is, that moment never comes. I learned that when I was traveling in Vietnam. I stayed in a small guest house run by a sweet elderly couple who spoke a little English, and I spoke almost no Vietnamese. We communicated with a mix of smiles, pointing, and broken English. On my second day, I offered to help them set the table for breakfast, and they showed me how to say the names of dishes in their language. In return, they practiced saying things like tea and coffee with me. It became a daily ritual. And here's the interesting thing. Neither of us spoke perfectly, but we understood each other. That's the real magic of language. Another time, back in my own city, I met a tourist at the bus stop who was trying to find the art museum. She had a map, but couldn't figure out the route. I explained it to her in English, using short sentences and pointing in the right direction. She smiled and thanked me, and as I walked away, I realized that even small interactions like that are opportunities to practice and grow. You don't need a classroom to improve. The world itself becomes your teacher if you let it. I also believe that setting mini challenges makes the learning process more exciting. For example, one week, I challenged myself to learn 10 new phrases and actually use them in conversation with friends. I wrote them down on sticky notes and placed them in spots I'd see often, on my fridge, near my desk, even on my bathroom mirror. Whenever I saw one, I'd say it out loud. The funny part was when my friends noticed I was using more interesting expressions, and they started asking, "Where did you learn that?" It became a fun game, and it motivated me to keep going. Then there was the time I started journaling, in English every night. I didn't just write about big events. I wrote about simple things like what I had for dinner, what the weather was like, or a random thought I had during the day. Over time, I began experimenting with describing feelings, giving more details and even adding bits of humor. Reading back those entries months later, I could actually see how much my writing and vocabulary had improved. And you know what's fascinating? Sometimes, the real progress shows up in unexpected moments, like the day I was shopping for clothes, and the cashier made a small joke in English. Without even thinking, I replied with a joke of my own, in English, and we both laughed. You know, sometimes I think about how our daily life is like a big puzzle. Every day we're trying to fit all the small pieces together: work, family, friends, health, and a little time for ourselves. Yesterday, I had one of those days where I thought I planned everything perfectly. I woke up early, had my to-do list ready, and even had time to drink my coffee slowly while watching the morning sunlight pour through my kitchen window. I was feeling proud of myself. But then, of course, life had other plans. My neighbor knocked on the door telling me that the electricity in our street had gone out. Apparently, there was some repair work that nobody told us about. So my plan to work from home smoothly went out the window. Instead, I had to grab my laptop, run to the nearest coffee shop, and find a quiet corner to work from. And you know what? At first I was annoyed, but it actually turned into a really nice day. I met a young student sitting next to me, and we ended up chatting about his dream of becoming an architect. It reminded me that sometimes the things we think are inconveniences can actually be little surprises from life. It's a lot like language learning. We make plans, like studying a new set of vocabulary every day or listening to a podcast during lunch, but life interrupts us. The trick is to stay flexible and make use of whatever situation we find ourselves in. For example, if your train is delayed, instead of scrolling through random videos, you can listen to an English podcast or observe conversations around you. Even standing in line at the grocery store can become a language learning moment. I once practiced describing everything I saw in English in my head while waiting at the checkout. The woman is wearing a red scarf. The cashier is scanning. A bottle of milk. The little boy is holding a chocolate bar. By the time it was my turn to pay, I had practiced more English in 10 minutes than I usually do in a whole day. Speaking of the grocery store, I had such a funny moment there last week. I was buying vegetables, and I saw a man holding a pineapple, looking completely confused. He turned to me and said, "Excuse me, do you know how to tell if this pineapple is ripe?" I couldn't help but laugh because I had the same question just a few months ago. So I shared the little trick I learned. If the leaves pull out easily, the pineapple is ready. He looked so relieved, as if I had just solved a big mystery in his life. And the best part? We ended up talking about our favorite fruits, and he taught me that in his language, pineapple is called ananas, which is the same in many other languages. That little exchange made me realize again that simple, everyday conversations with strangers can be an amazing way to connect and learn something new about language, culture, and even fruit. You see, when you open yourself up to small moments like these, you also give yourself the chance to practice English naturally. It doesn't always have to be about studying from a book or following a strict lesson plan. Life is the best classroom, and every day gives you new material. Think about your own week. Maybe you had a conversation with a taxi driver. Maybe you explained your favorite dish to a friend. Or maybe you had to call customer service about a problem. All of those situations are perfect for improving your English skills. You can even replay them in your mind later and think, how could I have said that better? Or, what other words could I have used? That's how you keep growing, without feeling like you're forcing yourself to study. Another example comes from my cousin, Emma. She's learning English too, but she's not the kind of person who sits down with a textbook for hours. Instead, she makes her learning part of her hobbies. She loves baking, so she follows English language recipe blogs and YouTube channels. She watches them carefully, pauses to understand every step, and even writes down the new words she hears. One day she told me, "Natasha, I never knew the word whisk before, but now I use it every time I bake a cake." She even laughs about how her kitchen has become her English classroom. And it works for her. She's learning without pressure, without boredom, and in a way that feels natural. I think that's something we all need to remember. When you combine English with things you already enjoy, it doesn't feel like hard work. If you love movies, watch them in English. If you like reading about science, find simple English articles on topics you enjoy. If you're into sports, follow sports commentary in English. You won't even notice how much you're learning because you'll be so engaged in the content. And that's the real secret. Curiosity is the best teacher. The other day, I was sitting in a small park near my home. It was one of those golden afternoons when the air feels soft and the trees are glowing in the sunlight. I had my notebook with me and I decided to play a little game. I looked around and started writing short descriptions of everything I saw. A man in a blue jacket is jogging slowly. 2 children are sharing a packet of chips. A little white dog is chasing a butterfly. It felt like I was painting pictures with words, and it made me realize that even a quiet afternoon in the park can be an opportunity to practice English. If you try this, you'll see how your mind starts noticing details you usually ignore, and your vocabulary grows without you even trying too hard. Now, here's something interesting that happened last month. I had to attend a wedding in another city. Weddings are always such rich places for stories. The music, the food, the clothes, the emotions. During the reception, I sat next to an elderly lady who spoke very little English, but she wanted to practice. She told me about her grandchildren, her garden, and how she loves to make jam from the berries she grows. Her English wasn't perfect, but her eyes sparkled with excitement as she spoke. And I realized something. Confidence is not about having perfect grammar or knowing every word. It's about being brave enough to share your thoughts and connect with people. She didn't care if she made mistakes, and that's exactly why our conversation was so warm and memorable. Moments like these are exactly why I always encourage learners to speak as much as possible. Don't wait until you feel ready, because that moment may never come. Just speak. Even if you only know a few words, use them. Even if your pronunciation isn't perfect, say them out loud. Every time you speak, you get a little bit better. And every time you connect with someone through language, you grow more confident. I want to share a story about something that happened to me during a busy morning in the city. It was a chilly autumn day, and the streets were crowded with people rushing to work, their breath visible in the crisp air. I was on my way to a meeting and decided to grab a coffee from a small cafe I had never visited before. The place was cozy, with warm lighting and soft music playing in the background. As I stepped inside, the barista greeted me with a friendly smile and asked what I wanted in English. I ordered my usual cappuccino, but then realized I wanted to ask about the types of pastries they had that day. The menu was on the wall, but some of the names were unfamiliar to me. I took a deep breath and said, "Could you tell me about your pastries? Which one do you recommend?" The barista's eyes lit up as she described her favorite, a cinnamon swirl bun that was fresh and sweet. I decided to try it, and it was delicious. While waiting, I noticed an elderly man sitting alone, reading a newspaper. He looked up and smiled at me, so I decided to start a conversation. I said, "Good morning. Are you enjoying the newspaper?" He chuckled and replied, "Yes, though sometimes the news is not very cheerful." We talked about the weather, the upcoming holiday season, and his favorite places in the city. Even though our conversation was simple, it felt warm and genuine. That morning reminded me how small moments and everyday interactions can become great opportunities to practice English. Speaking to strangers in everyday situations, whether it's at a cafe, in a park, or while shopping, helps build confidence and fluency. Let me tell you about another experience related to daily life and language learning. A few months ago, my husband and I decided to start gardening. Neither of us had much experience, but we thought it would be fun. We bought some seeds for tomatoes, basil, and flowers, and set up pots on our balcony. Every evening, we'd check the plants, water them, and talk about what we saw. We called this time our plant talk, where we described the changes in English. For example, we'd say, "Look, the tomato plant has grown 2 new leaves today," or "The basil smells very fresh." Talking about our plants helped us practice vocabulary related to nature and daily activities, and it also became a relaxing way to end our day. Plus, it made the whole gardening experience more engaging and meaningful. This story highlights how combining your hobbies or daily routines with English practice is an effective way to improve your skills without feeling like you're studying. When you talk about things you care about, language learning becomes natural and enjoyable. Now, I want to share a story from when I volunteered at a local library. It was during a summer reading program for children, and my job was to help kids read books aloud in English. One afternoon, a shy boy named Lucas came to me holding a book with big pictures and simple words. He told me he was nervous about reading in English because he was still learning. I encouraged him gently and said, "Let's read it together." We took turns reading pages, and I praised his effort. By the end of the session, Lucas was smiling and felt proud. This experience reminded me how important encouragement and patience are in learning. When someone feels supported, their confidence grows, and they become more willing to practice. Let's think about how you can create similar, supportive moments in your own English practice. Maybe you can find a language partner, join an English club, or even practice reading aloud by yourself. The key is to be kind to yourself and celebrate small achievements. Speaking of celebrations, I want to share a funny incident that happened during a family dinner. My sister was cooking a traditional recipe, and she asked me to help with the spices. I wasn't sure which one was which, so I guessed and added a generous amount of chili powder. When everyone tasted the dish, their faces turned red and they started reaching for water. My sister laughed and said, "Now it's definitely spicy." We all laughed together, and I learned a new phrase, to add a kick, meaning to make food spicy or exciting. Moments like this show how mistakes or surprises can be fun and educational. Don't be afraid to try new words or expressions, even if you might get it wrong. Language is about communication, connection, and sometimes a little humor. Another memorable experience happened while I was traveling in a new country. I was in a taxi, and the driver and I started talking about local attractions. His English was not perfect, but he was enthusiastic and patient. We exchanged stories about our favorite places to visit, and he recommended a hidden beach that few tourists knew about. After that, I visited the beach, and it was beautiful. That taxi ride was more than just transportation, it was an opportunity to learn about culture, practice speaking, and make a new friend. This shows how everyday conversations can be gateways to exciting experiences. Now, let's talk about technology and how it can help you practice English every day. For example, I use voice assistants on my phone to practice speaking. I ask questions like, "What's the weather today?" or "Set a reminder for 5 p.m." Sometimes I ask for jokes or fun facts. It's a simple way to practice pronunciation and get comfortable speaking aloud. You can also join online communities or forums where people discuss topics you enjoy. Participating in chats or writing comments helps improve your reading and writing skills in a natural context. Finally, I want to tell you about the importance of patience and persistence. Learning a language is a journey with ups and downs. There will be days when everything feels difficult and you might want to give up. But remember, every small step counts. Whether you learn a new word, understand a sentence, or have a short conversation, you're moving forward. Keep practicing daily. Use every chance you get to speak, listen, read, and write in English. Make it part of your life, like my gardening routine or daily chats at the cafe. The more you immerse yourself, the faster you'll see progress. I want to share with you an experience I had during one of my visits to the local farmer's market. It's a place filled with the scent of fresh herbs, ripe fruits, and the hum of friendly conversations. One Saturday morning, as I wandered between the stalls, I noticed an elderly woman carefully examining some fresh tomatoes. She seemed unsure which ones to pick. I approached her and asked in English if she needed help choosing. She smiled warmly and said she was looking for tomatoes that were good for making sauce. I explained that tomatoes which are firm but slightly soft to the touch are usually best for cooking. We talked about recipes, sharing ideas about spices and ingredients. She told me about a family recipe for tomato sauce that had been passed down through generations. Our chat wasn't long, but it was meaningful, and it reminded me that even short conversations can enrich your day and your language skills. This simple interaction shows how everyday moments are perfect opportunities to practice English. When wise. You step out with the mindset that every person you meet might become part of your learning journey. You open doors to new knowledge and friendships. On another occasion, my husband and I decided to take a weekend trip to the mountains. We rented a small cabin and planned to spend the days hiking and enjoying nature. One morning, while walking along a trail, we met a family from another country. They spoke English as a second language, and we quickly began chatting. Their children were excitedly describing the wildlife they had seen, and the parents shared stories about their travels. The conversation flowed naturally as we all swapped recommendations for places to visit. We talked about the importance of preserving nature and how much we enjoyed outdoor activities. The children asked many questions, and I was amazed at how well they expressed themselves in English. Talking to them reminded me that age doesn't limit learning, and that curiosity is a powerful driver. Travel experiences like this are wonderful chances to practice English in a relaxed and enjoyable environment. When you engage in conversations about topics you love, whether it's nature, culture, or hobbies, language learning feels effortless. Let me also tell you about a time when I volunteered at a community center helping new immigrants adjust to life in a new country. Many of them face the challenge of learning English while navigating daily tasks such as shopping, using public transportation, or visiting the doctor. One day, I assisted a young woman named Maria, who was trying to register her children for school. We went through the paperwork together, translating and explaining the necessary information. She was nervous but determined to learn. Throughout our time together, she practiced English phrases like, "Where is the school?" and "What documents do I need?" This experience showed me the power of language to empower people and build confidence. When you can communicate your needs and understand others, life becomes much easier and more joyful. Now, I'd like to share a funny story about an English mistake I once made while shopping for clothes. I wanted to ask the salesperson if the shirt I liked came in a larger size. Instead of saying, "Do you have this in a larger size?" I accidentally asked, "Do you have this in a bigger size?" The salesperson smiled and gently corrected me, explaining that while bigger isn't wrong, larger is the more common term when referring to clothing sizes. We laughed together, and I realized how small differences in word choice can matter in English. But these moments are valuable because they help you learn and remember better. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. They are stepping stones on your path to fluency. I also want to talk about the importance of listening in daily life. For instance, while cooking, I often listen to English radio programs or podcasts. It's a habit I developed to immerse myself in the language, even when my hands are busy. Sometimes I don't understand every word, but the tone, rhythm, and context help me grasp the meaning. Listening to English regularly trains your ear and helps you become comfortable with different accents and speeds. It also exposes you to new vocabulary and expressions used in everyday conversations. Another practical tip is to practice English with family members or friends. My husband and I make it a point to speak English at least for part of the day. We ask each other simple questions like, "What are your plans for today?" or "How was your day?" These small dialogues help us maintain our skills and build confidence in speaking. In fact, creating a supportive environment where you can practice English without judgment is essential. Whether it's with family, friends, or a language partner, regular conversation is key to improvement. Let me finish this section with a story about patience. When I first started learning English, I struggled with understanding native speakers, especially when they spoke quickly or used slang. It was frustrating at times, but I reminded myself that progress takes time. I started watching TV shows with subtitles and gradually reduced my reliance on them. I listened to podcasts daily and tried to mimic the pronunciation and intonation. Slowly but surely, I noticed improvements. I could follow conversations better and felt more confident joining in. This journey taught me that consistency and patience are more important than perfection. Celebrate every small victory and keep moving forward. There's something magical about mornings. The quiet, the soft light, the feeling that a new day holds endless possibilities. One morning, not too long ago, I decided to change my routine a little. Instead of rushing through my breakfast, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and my phone. I opened a language app, but instead of just doing exercises, I chose to write a short story in English about the day ahead. I described what I planned to do. I will walk to the park, buy some fresh fruit at the market, and meet a friend for coffee. Writing in this way made me think more deeply about everyday activities in English, and it helped me prepare useful vocabulary and phrases for real life. That same day, as I walked through the park, I practiced describing everything around me silently or out loud. The golden leaves, the sound of children laughing, the gentle breeze. Describing things in detail trains your mind to notice and use English naturally. Later, I stopped at the market and spoke to the vendor about the fresh strawberries and how to tell if they were ripe. Even simple questions like, "How much for a box of strawberries?" and "Are these organic?" helped me practice important English skills. After buying my fruit, I met my friend Tom at a nearby cafe. We chatted about books we were reading, the upcoming holidays, and the new art exhibit in town. Talking with Tom always pushes me to use new vocabulary because he's very curious and loves discussing different topics. Our conversations are relaxed and fun, but they help me improve my speaking and listening skills every time. This shows how turning your daily routine into a language adventure can make a big difference. When you prepare a little, practice observation, and have conversations, English becomes a natural part of your life, not just a subject you study. Speaking of friends, I want to share a story about my colleague Sarah. She recently moved from another country and has been learning English while working in a busy office. At first, she was nervous about talking to clients or joining meetings, but she took a brave step. Every day, she set a small goal for herself, to say at least 5 new sentences in English to her coworkers. One day after a meeting, she asked her manager if she could explain part of a project update. Her manager agreed, and Sarah practiced what she wanted to say. During the meeting, she spoke clearly, and her coworkers listened attentively. Afterward, they praised her efforts, which made her feel proud and motivated. Sarah's story reminds us that confidence grows through practice and that even small steps can lead to big changes. Speaking up in the workplace may feel intimidating, but it's a valuable way to improve your English and your professional skills. Another time I was shopping for a birthday gift for my nephew. I went to a toy store where the salesperson and I had a lively conversation about the best toys for a 10-year-old. We talked about popular games, educational toys, and even some puzzles. I learned new words like board game, building, blocks, and puzzle pieces. It was fun to hear his recommendations and ask questions. When I left the store, I felt like I had not only bought a great gift, but also had a real-life English lesson. Daily activities like shopping, cooking, or visiting the post office are full of opportunities to use English. When you approach them with curiosity and the willingness to communicate, your skills grow without you even noticing. One evening, I tried something different. I invited my neighbors over for tea and asked everyone to speak English during the visit. We played simple games, told stories, and practiced greetings. It was a joyful way to connect and learn together. We laughed a lot, especially when someone mixed up words or mispronounced a phrase, but we corrected each other kindly. Creating an English-speaking environment at home or with friends can greatly accelerate your learning. When you make mistakes together and support one another, you build both language skills and friendships. Now, let me tell you about an unexpected challenge I faced on a train trip. The train was delayed, and the announcements were made quickly, in English. I struggled to understand the reason and how long the delay would last. I asked a fellow passenger for help, and she explained patiently. Then we chatted about train travel and shared tips for passing the time. That experience taught me how important it is to ask for clarification if you don't understand something. It also showed me how a simple question can lead to friendly conversation and new connections. Technology is also a great tool. I often use language learning apps to listen to dialogues and practice speaking. I like to record myself and compare my pronunciation with native speakers. Sometimes I send voice messages to friends who are also learning English, and we give each other feedback. It's motivating and makes the learning process interactive. Also, reading books or articles in English helps expand your vocabulary and improves your understanding of sentence structure. I started with simple stories and gradually moved on to newspapers and magazines. When I come across new words, I write them down and try to use them in my daily conversations. Let me share a story about patience. When I first learned English, I was frustrated by how long it took to understand movies without subtitles. One day, I decided to watch a favorite movie scene repeatedly until I understood every word. I practiced pronouncing the lines and tried to mimic the actor's intonation. Over time, my listening improved, and I could enjoy movies without needing subtitles. That experience showed me that patience and persistence are key to mastering English. Finally, I want to remind you that everyone's learning journey is unique. Some days will be easier, others harder, but every effort counts. Celebrate your progress, no matter how small, and keep exploring new ways to practice. Speak with friends, listen to podcasts, write journals, and don't hesitate to ask questions. Let me tell you about a time when I decided to challenge myself in a completely new way. It was early spring, and the city was just waking up from the cold winter. I signed up for a cooking class where the instructor spoke only English. The class was about making traditional dishes from different countries, and I was both excited and nervous. On the first day, the instructor explained the recipe step by step. At times, I struggled to understand every instruction, but I listened, carefully asked questions, and watched the actions closely. I remember one moment when she said, "Add a pinch of salt," and I wasn't sure how much that meant. I asked, "How much is a pinch?" She smiled and showed me with her fingers. That simple gesture helped me understand immediately. Cooking, alongside other students, was a fun way to practice English. We chatted while preparing ingredients, shared stories about food from our countries, and laughed when someone made a mistake. The class became more than just learning to cook. It was about practicing English naturally in a real situation. After the class, I started cooking those recipes at home, following the instructions in English, which helped me remember the words and phrases better. Trying new activities in English like this can boost your confidence and make learning enjoyable. I also want to share a moment when I had to deal with a minor emergency while traveling. I lost my wallet during a city tour and needed to explain the situation to the local police in English. It was a stressful moment, but I stayed calm and described everything clearly. The officers were very helpful, and I managed to file a report with their assistance. This experience taught me how important it is to practice English for practical, everyday needs. Being able to explain your situation calmly and clearly is a skill that can make a big difference in real life. Another memorable story happened at a community book exchange event. People brought books to share and talked about their favorite authors and genres. I met a man who was a huge fan of mystery novels. We spent a long time discussing different books, and he recommended some titles I hadn't heard of before. The conversation helped me learn new words related to reading and storytelling. It also showed me how shared interests can create meaningful English conversations. When you talk about what you love, language learning becomes natural and exciting. In everyday life, I find it helpful to keep a small notebook or use a phone app to write down new words or phrases I hear. For example, last week, a friend used the expression "break the ice" during a conversation. I hadn't heard it before, so I looked it up and learned it means to start a conversation in a friendly way. Later, I used "break the ice" when meeting new people at a social event. It felt great to use a new expression in the right context, and it made the conversation flow more smoothly. I also remember when I started listening to news podcasts in English. At first, the vocabulary was challenging, and some topics were hard to follow. But I kept listening every day, sometimes pausing and replaying parts I didn't understand. Over time, I noticed my listening skills improving. I could understand news reports better, and I learned new words about current events. This practice helped me feel more connected to the world while improving my English. Let me share a story about practicing English with family. My husband and I decided to have English-only evenings once a week. During dinner, we spoke only in English about our day, plans, and thoughts. Sometimes we played word games or told stories. These evenings became special moments for us to improve together and support each other. It also made travel stories are always rich with language opportunities. Once, while waiting at the airport, I struck up a conversation with a fellow traveler. We talked about our destinations, travel experiences, and favorite foods. Sharing travel stories in English helped me practice past tense verbs and descriptive language. It was also exciting to hear about new places and cultures. In your own life, look for chances to share your stories in English. Whether it's about a recent trip, a hobby, or a funny moment, storytelling is a powerful way to practice speaking and connect with others. Finally, I want to encourage you to set small, achievable goals for your English learning. Maybe today's goal is to learn 5 new words or to listen to a podcast episode. Tomorrow, you might try writing a short paragraph about your day. By breaking your learning into manageable steps, you avoid feeling overwhelmed and stay motivated. Remember, progress in language learning is a journey, not a race. I want to share a story about a day when I decided to take public transportation instead of driving. It was a busy weekday morning, and I thought it would be a good chance to practice listening and speaking in English with the people around me. I caught the bus and found a seat near the front. The bus driver greeted each passenger with a friendly, "Good morning," and I replied, "Good morning," each time. During the ride, I overheard a conversation between 2 passengers discussing their plans for the weekend. One was talking about going hiking, and the other mentioned visiting a museum. I listened carefully to their words and tried to catch new phrases. When the bus reached my stop, I thanked the driver and wished him a good day. That simple interaction made me feel more connected to the city and gave me confidence in my English. Later that day, I went to a bookstore. I love browsing books, and this time I focused on reading the back covers and book descriptions in English. I picked up a novel that sounded interesting and read the first few pages. Some words were unfamiliar, but the story captured my attention, so I decided to borrow it. Reading novels or short stories is a great way to expand your vocabulary and improve comprehension while enjoying a good story. On my way home, I stopped by a bakery to buy some bread. The baker was friendly and asked if I wanted a fresh loaf. I asked about the ingredients because I have some allergies. We talked about different types of bread and how they are made. This conversation helped me practice asking questions and understanding answers in English. That evening, I prepared dinner while listening to an English cooking podcast. The host described how to make a simple pasta dish step by step. I followed along and repeated the instructions out loud. Cooking while listening made me practice pronunciation and learn new cooking terms. Let me tell you about a memorable experience I had at a community garden. It's a place where people come together to grow vegetables and flowers. One weekend, I volunteered to help plant seeds. While working, I met a group of gardeners from different countries. We talked about plants, seasons, and gardening techniques. Even though our English was not perfect, we communicated and learned from each other. This experience showed me how language connects people from diverse backgrounds. When you join group activities or volunteer, you practice English in real life situations and build friendships. Another day, I visited the post office to send a package. The clerk asked me some questions about the contents and destination. I answered using simple sentences and asked about shipping options. Although it was a routine task, communicating in English made me feel more independent and capable. Small, everyday tasks like this help build your confidence. Don't underestimate the power of practicing English in daily errands. I also want to share a funny moment that happened during a family gathering. We were playing a word game, and I tried to explain the rules in English. My uncle misunderstood and thought I said rules for swimming. We all laughed, and I corrected him gently. That little mix-up turned into a great opportunity to learn new words and practice pronunciation together. Language learning is full of surprises like this. Embrace the mistakes because they are part of the process. One weekend, I took a long walk in the park and noticed a group of people practicing yoga. I asked if I could join the class. The instructor spoke English and explained the poses clearly. I followed along and felt relaxed. After the session, we talked about health and exercise. Trying new activities in English helps you learn vocabulary related to fitness and wellness. It also encourages you to speak in a supportive environment. During a visit to the library, I discovered a section with English language magazines. I picked up a travel magazine and read articles about different countries. The stories inspired me and helped me learn new words about geography and culture. Reading magazines or articles about topics you enjoy keeps your learning interesting and relevant. I remember a time when I had to make a phone call to book a medical appointment. I practiced the conversation in English beforehand and wrote down key phrases. During the call, I spoke slowly and clearly. The receptionist was helpful and confirmed the appointment details. Phone conversations can be challenging, but preparing in advance makes them easier. Practice common phone phrases to feel ready. Let me tell you about a spontaneous conversation I had while waiting in line at a cafe. The person behind me asked about my favorite coffee. We talked about different types of coffee drinks and our morning routines. The conversation was light and friendly, and I practiced using descriptive words. Casual conversations like this happen every day. Be ready to join in and enjoy practicing English naturally. One day, I decided to keep a daily journal in English. I wrote about my activities, feelings, and plans. Writing regularly improved my grammar and vocabulary. It also helped me reflect on my progress and set new goals. Keeping a journal is a simple yet effective way to practice writing and organize your thoughts in English. Another story comes from a trip to the supermarket. I needed to buy ingredients for a new recipe. I asked the staff where to find fresh herbs. They showed me the section and recommended their favorites. We talked about cooking and flavors. Shopping in English turns routine errands into learning moments. I also remember volunteering at a local event where I helped set up and welcome guests. I greeted people in English and answered their questions. This experience improved my social English skills and made me feel part of the community. Volunteering is a fantastic way to practice English and meet new people. Finally, I want to share a moment when I watched a documentary in English about wildlife conservation. The narrator's voice was clear and the visuals were beautiful. I learned many new words related to animals and the environment. Watching documentaries expands your knowledge and listening skills.